You're listening to Ask the Expert on Sprott Money News.
Well, greetings once again from Sprott Money News and SprottMoney.com. This is your Ask the Expert segment for February 2017. I'm your host, Craig Hemke, and joining us this month is Paul Craig Roberts. Secretary Roberts is an economist, he's a journalist, he's an author and a blogger, but also maybe more widely known as being one of the assistant secretaries of the Treasury under the Reagan administration back in the 80s. He still runs, I guess, his own website called paulcraigroberts.org, and you can find many of his writings there. Secretary Roberts, thank you so much for spending some time with us here at Ask the Expert.
Well, Craig, I'm pleased to be with you.
This Ask the Expert segment is brought to you by the Sprott Money Precious Metal Storage Program. We have 5 international storage vaults and the most competitive prices in the industry, so please visit our international storage page at SprottMoney.com to learn more. Secretary Roberts, as you know, these questions were submitted over the course of the month by Sprott Money customers. We've got a nice list of them here, so if you're ready, I'll hit you with the first one.
Let's go.
The first one, and again, the first 3 actually are more politically based, and so we kind of want to tap into your wisdom and experience there. The first one has to do with the new president of the U.S., Donald Trump, and his ideas of draining the swamp. I guess we call there's a political swamp and there's a financial swamp. The question is it realistic to assume, given the list of Trump's cabinet appointees and the kind of the slant towards Goldman Sachs, is it realistic to assume that President Trump will have any success in draining the financial side of the swamp?
Well, Craig, my initial response to that question was that if you actually are going to take on Wall Street and the big banks, you've got to have people who understand that operation. And so, in other words, you can't get anywhere with a neophyte. Mm-hmm. He would be chewed up and spit out. So the question for me was whether or not the people, the insiders or former insiders that Trump was choosing would actually support his agenda. And if they would support his agenda, then he had chosen well, because they would know how the system operates and where bodies were buried and that sort of thing. So I said we can't know till we see what happens. So I was hopeful that he had picked people who knew how the system worked but would support his operation of cleaning it up. What I think now is that his presidency is effectively over. I think it died when he gave in and removed Michael Flynn. Yeah. Because the most important issue facing us, I think, is the relations with Russia. This is the first time in my lifetime that the United States government isn't working to diffuse tensions with the Russians rather than to increase them. And so this has been going on since Clinton. We have Clinton, George W. Bush, and Obama, who have reversed the policy of reducing tensions between nuclear powers to increasing the tensions. And therefore, I thought Flynn's appointment, because he doesn't see the point of tensions, and Tillerson, who hasn't any connection to the military security complex and really would, as a representative of Exxon, would rather be doing business with the Russians. So I thought they were promising appointments, but I think having been defeated on the basis of nothing, and dismissing Flynn, the blood in the water, the replacement of Flynn with a Russophobic guy. So I think effectively the Trump presidency is over.
Well, I think that kind of tees up actually the next 2 questions, as a matter of fact. So I'm going to steer back toward that Flynn, I guess we'll call it a firing, because in the end, I guess that's what it was. The second question that was submitted is, specifically in the battle with what's being called the deep state, can Trump win? And it sounds as if you think maybe he's already lost.
Yeah, I think he's already lost. Yeah, because you see, already his vocabulary's changed. He's now said Crimea, Russia has to give Crimea back to Ukraine. Well, that's fantasy. Mm-hmm. That's their Black Sea naval base. Right. Crimea has been part of Russia for 300 years. It was never part of Ukraine. That was an administrative thing that happened under Khrushchev, when the Ukraine and Russia were two socialist republics comprising the Soviet Union. So it was the same country. So it doesn't make any sense for Trump to say that. Now he's increasing the military budget. Now he said that he doesn't support a new START treaty, that is a strategic arms limitation treaty, that the United States has to have superiority. Well, all of these are mindless things. I mean, it's telling the Russians that somehow they're even more in our sights. So I think that he's already defeated. He's appeasing the deep state. They may leave him in office, but effectively he's no longer in control of his government.
Well, and then that is a segue to the third question, which sounds like I know what the answer is going to be to this, and it's something that I've been worried about now, at least specifically since the Maidan Revolution, if you want to call it that, the Maidan coup of almost exactly 3 years ago. Now, the third question is, the U.S. seems to be inexorably marching toward war with Russia, Iran, or both. What can be done to stop this?
Well, I don't think we can do anything now that Trump apparently has collapsed. Now, maybe it's always possible he's just sort of holding his cards close to his chest, and that he's got his CIA director in there trying to figure out who's been carrying on this campaign against him, and that one morning we're going to wake up and see a whole bunch of people arrested or fired or under indictment. I mean, that's always a possibility. I mean, sometimes when you get in over your head before you're ready, you have to kind of back off and play like you're surrendering, and it's possible that he's doing that. But I'm not counting on it. The real problem that we face is twofold. One, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, this unleashed the neoconservative ideology of American world supremacy, that the United States was the unipower and could act unilaterally anywhere on Earth. And so it's world empire. This is the goal of the neoconservatives that have dominated the government and foreign policy since Clinton. And all the wars we've been in are part of their agenda. So that is an ideological thing. It goes hand in glove with the material interest of the military security complex. The total annual budget of the military security complex is much larger than just the Pentagon's budget, because it includes the budget of all the intelligence agencies. There are 16 of them. It includes the Energy Department, because that's where the nuclear weapon funding is. It's all these overseas bases. It's all the support that we give allies, and it's roughly $1,000 billion annually. So there's a tremendous amount of money and power associated with that budget, and it has to have a threat. You can't justify that type of an annual expenditure. It's essentially $1 trillion a year, when so many other things are in trouble. They say Social Security, Medicare, education, the infrastructure of the country is collapsing, and so on and so on. So if you're going to put that kind of resources into the military security budget, you've got to have a good reason. And they haven't had a reason since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So they tried to create the Muslim terrorist threat. It's not a big enough threat. So they have brought back the Russian threat. And they're not going to let go of it, because if they do, they haven't any justification for this massive budget, all the money, all the power that goes with it. So when you take the material interest of the military security complex, which Eisenhower warned us of, more than a half century ago.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine how entrenched it is now. It scared him then. What was that, 1961?
Yep.
So you've got this material interest. You have the ideology of the neoconservatives who dominate American foreign policy and have through the regimes of the last three presidents, so 24 years. So together, this is far more powerful than the president. And it's not that they want war, but what it is, it's constant provocation of countries who resist following our will. That is Russia, China, Iran. And the three of them are allied, either objectively or de facto. And so an attack on one really annoys the others. So you've got a situation where the risk of war comes from mistakes. All during the Cold War with the Soviets, there were constant false alarms of incoming ICBMs. Mm-hmm. Both countries experienced this. We would get false alarms. The Russians have launched. The Russians would get false alarms. The Americans have launched. Now, fortunately, since both sides were working to diffuse tensions, no one ever believed that the alarms were real. They said it must be a mistake. And so nobody pushed the button. But when you've got a situation where you convince the Russians that you're after them, that you are preparing your population for an attack on them, when you're making constant, crazy allegations against them, calling the president of Russia a thug, a murderer, the new Hitler, carrying out all kinds of provocative military operations on their border, putting anti-ballistic missile bases on their border, pulling off a coup in the Ukraine, part of Russia for 300 years. When you do this, you make people feel threatened. And if you're telling everybody here, as the military security complex and the media and the neocons do, that the Russians are evil incarnate and they've hijacked our election and put their Trump operative in the White House, and you get everybody all worked up like this, then when you get a false alarm, everybody's prepared to believe it.
Yep.
And so that's where you get the really big risk right there, because these false alarms are unavoidable.
Yeah. And
of course, there's another risk, and that is Obama has already set in motion a $1 trillion upgrade of our nuclear forces, and there's absolutely no reason for that. And now Trump says, it's not enough, and he's upped the defense budget 10%. Just the 10%, a 9% upgrade in the current budget that Trump has just announced, that's already 80% of the total Russian military budget for the year. So if you convince the Russians that you are building up massive forces in order to slaughter them, while they still have the advantage, and they do, their weapon systems are better, their current missiles are better, they're tempted to strike, not sit there until you've outspent them for so much and you've built up such fantastic capabilities and all that you attack them. So this is reckless. This is really reckless. It's telling them, hey, look, we're after you. Look at all this money that we're spending. We're going to get such fantastic weapons. You'll either have to submit and do as we say. Well, I just don't think the Russians are going to sit there and wait.
Right.
So this is a dangerous situation. It's the most dangerous situation of my lifetime.
I would agree. Sir, I've got the other three remaining questions deal more with financial and economic policies and questions. The first one kind of plays into what you mentioned earlier about this notion of increasing defense spending, and I know President Trump wants to talk about infrastructure spending and all of that. However, before we get there, the current debt ceiling of the U.S., which has been changed from being a number to being just a time period where we can borrow, the current debt ceiling expires on March the 15th, just a couple of weeks away. What do you think will happen, if anything, as we approach and get to that expiration date?
Oh, they'll raise it. They'll raise it. And in fact, with all of the increase in the power of the executive that Bush and Obama have created, Trump can do it on his own. He can just declare a national emergency.
I suppose that's true, yeah. And
announce the rise in the debt ceiling. So I don't think it's an issue here at all. I know that conservatives and hard money men and things like that worry about these things, but that is something that, in my view, is of no consequence.
Fair enough. Now, I know, Secretary Roberts, you've written in the past about I guess we'll call it manipulation, suppression of gold prices, and the reasons why central banks and governments do that. This question, though, is specific to silver. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. Silver was $18 an ounce back in 1979. And yet, even though it's used in every cell phone and solar panel on Earth, it's still $18 an ounce in 2017. Just wondering what comes to mind as an explanation for that.
Well, silver is called the poor man's gold. And so they're just as interested in suppressing the silver price as they are in suppressing the gold price. And it's easy for them to suppress both just simply by selling naked shorts in the futures market. And we see this all the time. I mean, it's constant. Every time the gold price starts rising in COMEX, all of a sudden, at some strange time of day, within a few minutes, there'll be massive sales of future contracts. There's shorts will hit the market, and since it's a paper market, they can always increase the amount of paper gold just by printing more shorts. So they can dump it all in there and drive the price down. And so if they are driving down the gold price and the silver price is rising, it doesn't work.
Right.
So they have to keep both down. They're both monetary metals, have always been monetary metals, and countries, and in the Roman Empire, silver was really the means of payment. The army was paid in silver. Gold was not very often used. It was something really rich people had. So they're monetary metals, and so you can't have one kept under control without keeping the other under control.
Got it. Well, sir, I very much appreciate your sharing your valuable time with us. I have just one last question for you. This has to do with what is called the war on cash. We're seeing that around the world, elimination of physical cash, physical fiat currency. What do you make of that? Will cash eventually be eliminated, physical cash? And will that enable the installation of negative interest rates for the banks?
Well, Larry Summers gave a speech some time back in which he was saying that we needed to get rid of cash in order to force people to spend their money, thinking like, a 1950s Keynesian. Mm-hmm. So they would be forced to spend their money because negative interest rates could be imposed on their balances. So if they didn't spend it, they would be losing the value of it. So his justification for his speech, I don't know what his real motive was, but the justification was this is the modern application of Keynesianism forcing savings back into the economy and spending in order to maintain aggregate demand. So that type of argument was coming from Larry Summers. The negative interest rates, I think actually we've had them now for about 10 years because I don't believe the inflation measures. They've rigged the way they measure inflation to make it disappear. And this is important to them so that they can report price increases as economic growth. So I think we've had negative interest rates in real terms already. The real, I think, underlying motive of only having electronic money means that they've got total control over you. You've got no way. You can't take the electronic money and put it in a safe at home or put it in your mattress. You can't make payments that they can't know about. There can no longer be any off-the-books work or payments. Everything is known. They know everything you buy, where you bought it. And they can confiscate it if they want to, or they can just announce arbitrary penalties. So it's a control mechanism. It basically means that you are sort of permitted maybe to use your income, but there's no way you can say, okay, I think I need several $1,000s at home in the safe just in case something happens. So it's mainly a control thing. It basically takes away from people any ability to protect themselves from an emergency or to make payments that they don't want known. It can stop you from being able to help children outside the inheritance laws, or it has all kinds of control aspects. It just takes away your autonomy,
yes,
your independence. So I think that's the real interest that governments have in it, and I suspect they will go for it. They will. And in fact, Craig, most people already, the younger generation, don't use cash. They just use their cards.
Yep, or their phones.
So to them, it just looks like, it's more convenient. And so they probably won't even understand there's a danger to them of this. So I'm not, of course it can make those who are aware want to have gold and silver coins.
That's exactly right.
Because I think they will always be money, regardless of what the government says or bans. That's my take on it.
Yep, I think a lot of folks listening to us feel the same way, and that's all part of why folks continue to stack physical gold and silver, especially those Sprott Money customers that do just that. That's one of the reasons they're worried about, or one of the things they're worried about. Secretary Roberts, it has been a real pleasure to visit with you, and I think everybody that has listened to this has learned a lot and thoroughly enjoyed it. So I want to thank you again for spending some time with us, and I encourage everybody to go to the website, all spelled out as one word, paulcraigroberts.org, where you'll find all of Secretary Roberts' writings there and learn more about these subjects. Secretary Roberts, thank you so much for your time.
You're certainly welcome. Enjoyed talking to you, Craig.
And from all of us here at Sprott Money News and SprottMoney.com, thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again next month.